Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, it's all about, well, more A+. That's right, we're killing it. We're trying to get through all that content for you guys so that you can go past that exam. If you're keeping score, that's the 22901 for those of you in the know. You know what I'm talking about. Joining us back in the studio, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, we're glad to have you back. How's it going today, sir?
Man, it's going great. We've been troubleshooting our way through troubleshooting, that's for sure. That's right. And we're going to be talking about, well, the bane of just about all IT existence. In this episode, that's going to be about troubleshooting printers.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's right. I could think of a movie or two where the baseball bat is the maintenance tool that you use.
It is effective.
That's right. Also, keep in mind, printers are important. Like one of our other hosts says, Don Pizzette says, the whole entire network can fail, but if at least one printer is working, you can print your resume out the front door. So keep in mind, printers are important, and all joking aside, we're going to walk through just a real slew of problems that they can give you, and we'll talk about some of the common things that you can, you can check to make sure that these things can get fixed. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive right in. One of the first things they talk about are streaks. All right, when we talk about streaks in your printed output, could be a couple of things, right? One of the things could be is if it's a laser printer, it could be the toner hopper. It could be a toner hopper issue. Remember, that is where our toner is going to be, right? It could be low toner, for that matter. As toner starts to fade, you also get faded images as well. It could be low toner or low ink, right? If it's a an inkjet type printer, it could be things like, for instance, damaged print head assemblies. That is something that can also cause streaks as well. All right, some of the other things that we have, faded prints, right? When we talk about faded prints, well, faded prints can be just the fact that whatever the, not the print media itself, but whatever the compound is, the component is that, it actually hits the media, could be low. So some of these you're going to see that they could manifest themselves, in different types of media output, as far as, the fact that, hey, well, if we've got streaks, could be running out of toner, right? We got a faded image. Well, guess what? You could be running out of toner. It could be the fact, if you got a faded print, that if it's an impact printer, right? Don't discount the fact that impact printers are still used, especially because they are perfect for multi-copy printing, like carbon copies and stuff. So they're heavily used. You've probably seen them in last time you went to a mechanic shop and they maybe changed your oil and they printed out the bill. You'll see them a lot of times. They tear them right out and you sign and they keep their copy. You keep your copy, right? So it could be the fact that you have something like a ribbon replacement that needs to happen. All right, let's go ahead and let's dive into another one, right? Another one that they talk about is the toner not fused to the paper. I've got a little diagram here that we used inside of our print process, right? When we were talking about the print process, when we were talking about printers in general, just looking at the different print technologies, right? Let's go ahead real quick and let's kind of recap, right, that laser print process. And I kind of wrote it out a couple different ways, right? Remember, processing, cleaning, conditioning, writing, developing, transferring, and fusing. Boy, that sounds like the Mickey Mouse Club for sure. But remember, the last phase is the fusing process. And if you remember, if not, go back and check out our printing technologies episode. But remember that in the fusing process, what happens is, as the toner, right, as the toner, this EP drum, all right, I'll tell you what, we'll kind of brief through it here so we can know that the trouble, what the trouble is that's happening. Remember that the laser basically hits the scanning assembly, if you will, the scanning mirror, and that basically points the laser down on the electrostatic drum, right? It's called an EP drum, electrostatic photographic drum, I've heard. Remember, it responds to electricity and light as well. Now, the laser is responsible for reducing the electrical charge that is put on the drum assembly, right? Well, here's the problem. Here's what can happen, right? As the paper and as the drum rotates, right, we have this loose transfer of the toner, right? That's in the developing phase, right? The developing phase is when the toner is actually adhered to the paper because of the strong positive charge that's put on the paper. Now, here's the thing. The last part of the last part of the laser print process is as the paper travels through the fusing assembly, it uses friction and heat, right? Or pressure, excuse me, and heat. And kind of like if you're rolling out dough, right? We press the dough out and it flattens it out. Well, this uses a combination of that pressure and heat, and the heat, what it does is it melts the plastics that are in the toner, adhering it to the paper, right? That's the fusing process. Now, when this fails to happen, there's a couple of things that could be going on here, all right? One is the fact that the fusing assembly, it's failed, right? It isn't heating up. And because of that, right, what's going to happen is as that paper comes out of the, in the output tray, you can take the toner and you can kind of smear it a little bit, right? Because we're not having the heat at all. It's not melting and adhering the plastics to the paper. The other thing that could kind of happen too with this, and I'll probably mess up my slide here a little bit, is when basically what happens is the fusing rollers get overheated, right? It happens to warp them. All right, so as they turn, they're not turning in a perfect circle anymore, if you will. They're turning in more like an egg shape, and a portion as it turns doesn't even hit the paper at all. All right, and that also will cause the toner to not properly adhere, if you will, to the paper as well. The other thing that could happen too, all right, inside of the laser printer here, one of the things that it has a thermal temperature sensor. All right, it also has a fuse. Now, these keep in mind that these fusing assemblies, right, in the fusing process, they can heat up enough to cook a turkey. I think it's right around 350, 375 degrees, so it's very hot. All right, well, if the thermal temperature sensor finds out that high voltage power source isn't regulating the heat appropriately, it'll only let the heat rise to a certain level where the fuse will pop, right? And then if it's an industrial-based type printing assembly, you're going to hear it pop, right? It's a very loud sound if you're in like a printing factory, right? Well, when that happens, right, you're not going to get heat coming out of the machine either. So do keep that in mind. A couple of things that might happen. All right, how about creased paper? Well, creased paper can happen for a couple of reasons, right? It could be the feed mechanism. So for instance, let's say here we've got a thermal printer, right? Just kind of a basic diagram of a thermal printer. Well, if the feed assembly is misaligned, this can be inkjet printers, right? This can be, thermal printers that you got like receipt paper going into. If the feed assembly is off a little bit or damaged, it might crease the paper. This can happen too if Wes is loading the paper tray as well and you load the paper into the tray wrong, it ends up pulling it through and it creases a little bit. That can happen. I tell you, I not often, but I have seen it too, where the paper inside of the cut, right, that you pull, right, I don't know what they call them something, I just call them blocks of paper, but they actually have a name, but anyways, where that comes from the manufacturer that way. That's not quite as common, right, that the manufacturer would cause the problem. A lot of times what happens is, it will happen because either the feed assembly might be misaligned, it's not properly pulling the paper through, or the fact that you might have debris in there. And what happens is as that feed assembly is rolling and using friction, if you will, friction feed assembly is pulling that in, it kind of creases the paper. And the other thing is that the paper isn't aligned in the tray appropriately.
Man, Wes, I used to work on this one printer and it thought that its job was not printing but making little paper fans.
Oh, there we go.
Every time, man, I kid you not, you could buy like perfect paper fans. It would crease it up so hard.
A printer that doubles as a printer and an automatic origami machine,
yeah.
Right? So for sure,
It was like, stupid machine. Now I know why that was happening.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? You always hear a couple of stories, and anybody that's worked in IT that's come across printer problems, it's one of the reasons that's one of the reasons, and not only we're having this episode, but the fact that it is so common in the objectives. All right, so how about paper not feeding? All right, well, how about this? An empty media tray. If you don't have paper in the tray, it's not going to feed properly, right? Wrong type of media. And here's what I mean by that, right? A lot of times your trays, your feed assemblies have multimedia types, right? And what I mean is by multimedia types is I'm not saying you're going to plug your MP3 player into the tray and going to have that print something, but what I mean is that they support multiple media type formats, right? And if you don't have the the positioners aligned right, that could cause problems and not allow it to feed through. If you happen to have the wrong paper to begin with, it might cause it not to feed properly. Again, this could be the paper feed assembly has failed. You know, it's not uncommon that that you have the whole assembly in general ends up failing, right? Keep in mind that there are stepper motors in there, and a lot of times there are belts, and if the belts break or the stepper motors fail or the gears get ground down, right? How can that happen? How can the gears get ground down? All right, how can you grind? Well, they're plastic gears, right? And the commonality, right, is what happens when there's a paper jam. You reach in, and what do? You pull the paper right out, right? Well, in a lot of the machines that you see, the printing machines that you'll see, they have specific steps that you take. All right, you unlatch this device and it releases a mechanism. Then you unlatch this device and it releases a mechanism. And they do that so that you don't strip gears within them. All right. Basic home printers sometimes don't have that ability. You really have to just reach over and you have to kind of just pull the paper out. But keep in mind that could strip the gears, right? There's a lot of times they're just plastic little, teeth on them, and if they get stripped out, then that could also cause the paper not to feed. Environmental issues. All right. When we talk about environmental issues, we're not talking about global warming or climate change here. What we're talking about is if you have, let's say, for instance, a printer that is in a very humid location, right? Paper gets moisture in it, and again, that could cause problems, right? Paper jam. This can happen just, again, wrong media type, could be not loading the paper up correctly. Debris, again, could be inside of the feed mechanism as well, and that could be causing a jam as those rollers spin, they lock up and they don't allow the paper to come through. All right, a paper jam could also be the fact that maybe the feed assembly tried to grab more than one piece of paper and pull it through the machine likewise. All right, next thing we got. Now, this one is something that has a lot of different potential issues that could cause the problem, right? No connectivity. I can't connect to the printer, all right? Well, I want you to think of just basic network communications, right? Could be a network adapter issue. We say network adapter issue, now you have to find out if you have no connectivity to the printer, is it going to be on the device that you're trying to send the print job from? Right? You could just have no connection, right? If I turn off the wireless adapter in my computer, I can't understand why I can't send, a print job to the printer, right?
Well, so it sounds like what you're saying is when it comes to whether or not you have connectivity to the device, really our connectivity troubleshooting model is really where we're going to go. It's no different than any other device that we might be connected to.
No different than what you and I did in the network troubleshooting sections, right? Absolutely the case, Network configuration, right? So again, like Dan said, these are a recap of some of the things that we've already taken care of, and that's why I'm kind of briefing over them, right? We're not going to go into TCP/IP settings and what that means. Go check our networking episodes out, right? But you do have to keep them in mind, right? And here's the other thing that can happen too. When you have no connectivity, it might be the fact that you haven't shared the printer out. All right, that's one thing that can happen.
It'd be hard to grab a hold of that printer if it's not shared out.
That's right? It causes problems, right? The other thing could be a permissions issue. Could be a lack of an installed printer as well. If it's a local printer that you're sharing out to other people, maybe people don't have the permission to print to it, or maybe they're not an administrator, because remember, you need to install print drivers. So even if I do connect basically to a printer, if I don't have the administrative privileges in order to install the drivers, I'm not going to be able to connect to it. Could be general power issues, right? Never overlook the simple fixes first, right? We talk about, an Ethernet cable isn't plugged in. That's part of the network troubleshooting, but how about the power cable? Is the power cable plugged in, right? Oh, the power cable's plugged in. Well, did you lose power to the AC source, right? Again, another common issue that could be the problem. And I mentioned some other things, and again, a lot of these, like Dan said, just kind of fall under the troubleshooting wireless configuration, right? Check the wireless AP, the access point, right? If it happens to be a wireless network. All right, what are some of the other ones that we have? Garbled characters, right? Now, there's a couple of things that could be the problem here. Could be the fact that it's a compatibility issue, right? A lot of your operating systems, they support really going back to some legacy printers, but there's never a guarantee. All right, the other thing could be is a driver issue, right? If your characters aren't coming out the way you like them, they're garbled up like that, you're getting some kind of these funky type characters that you're like, that's not even English, or whatever language you speak, right? You're getting boxes and special characters, right? A lot of times that could be a driver issue. The fact that you got a corrupted driver, you don't have the right driver, well, if you have a missing driver, you're not going to be able to communicate with it at all. All right, so that could be the problem too. The other thing is, keep in mind all of your printers, they receive binary information, right? The electrical inputs, binary information into something called a formatter board, right? The formatter board is just the logic circuit, if you will, the logical circuit board, the PCB, that receives the communication, whether it's from a network adapter, sending information from the network adapter into the printer, or whether it is a local printer that is connected directly via some kind of physical cable to your computer. That formatter board, if I could say that right, if I could format the question right, or the answer right, what it does is it receives instructions from, so let's follow the chain of command here. Operating system communicates with the driver tells the formatter board, this is what I want you to print. The formatter board instructs the printer on how to basically print the output. Any one of those chains breaks down, we got a breakdown in communication, guess what? You might have output problems. Could be configuration issues too. That could be something. All right. What are some of the other things that they call out here, Dan? They call out vertical lines on the on the images or the page itself. Now this could be a couple of things, right? Vertical lines, right? We're not talking about horizontal lines. Horizontal lines a lot of times can be the fact that you got low toner, you've got an ink cartridge that is running out, right? Or it's dried up. You get vertical lines there. For instance, let's say a laser printer. If there is damage to the EP drum, right, that centralized drum that everything basically the whole laser print process rotates around, quite literally, if you get damage to the EP drum, right, I want you to think about this. If you've ever seen one of those industrial printers, right, well, what do you find next to the printers a lot of times? I find a staple remover and I find a stapler. Well, guess what? If I remove a staple and it gets down in any way down into that machine, guess it's not going to just come out, right? Unless you have a technician and you turn it upside down, right? But the point is, joking aside, is that debris could get down in there. And if it does, it can cause a problem, right? So vertical lines could be the fact that you have an electrostatic photographic drum. The EP drum could be damaged. All right. So what are some of the other things? I know it's a laundry list, ladies and gentlemen, but keep in mind, we're not kidding when we say printers are the bane of your existence, and you will need to know some of these for the exam, especially if they put you in the scenarios, right? Backed up print queue. All right. Now,
make sure you're taking good backups of your print queue. Right?
That's right. That's right. Well, you know, and I'll tell you what, that does beg the question, you know, print queue. All right. Well, what is that? Well, the print queue, I want you to understand, is a print job is when I have to print something. It's called a print job. All right. Now, you have a printer, if you will, driver. Microsoft is very, very confusing on what they talk about, you know, when they mention a printer. The printer is actually the software inside of the operating system, and the output that you see comes from what's called technically a print device. When we talk about a print queue, all right, a print queue is where those print jobs get stacked up, right? A queue, it's waiting in line. If I have a backed up print queue, all right, this actually has happened kind of recently on one of the printers that we have where the hosts print to, is the fact that it's not printing, right? What happens is the job is rendered, and a couple of things can happen, right? Depending on how you want performance, do you want backed up print queue, and that's what made me think of it, right? The print queue actually gets written to the hard drive first, right? Or the print job gets written to the hard drive. That's called spooling the print job. And then it gets sent to the queue, whether it's a local printer or across the network, and then the print queue holds it, all right? And if you're first come, first serve, right, as the job gets printed out, it just basically eliminates the print queue, right? It eliminates it out of the print queue. If it keeps backing up, then it could be the fact that your printer isn't printing, right? Or it's not connecting. You're sending print jobs, and what they're doing is they're being spooled to your local hard drive, and they're in your local print queue, but they're never being sent across the network to the actual printer that's going to print them out, right? So that could be a problem. Exam alerts. If you see print jobs in the print queue, I can tell you what it isn't. What it is not is a permissions issue. You have to have a print permission to even be able to send the print job to the print queue. That begs the question, what happens if the print jobs don't make it to the queue? Now, I don't even think they have this one on here, Dan, but I want to go ahead and mention it. What if your jobs don't go to the print queue at all? You don't have a printer installed, you don't have the appropriate driver, or you don't have permissions, right? You have to have, especially in Windows, right? You have to have print permission to even be able to send information to the print queue. And that includes a print server out there that is actually doing the printing on your behalf, or multiple network printers on their behalf. All right, backed up print queue. How about the printer is just completely turned off, power issues, or not even turned on to begin with? That could be a problem likewise. All right, The other thing I will say, and we've kind of seen this, you know, I'm thinking of that printer that we have next to the host section here at IT Pro TV, is that go over to your printer and look at the OSD, the on-screen display, right, and see if you see an error. If you see an error, like we've got one that's happening periodically, I think we've got maybe a print head assembly that's failing that says you need to recycle the printer, all right, power cycle the printer, which is a fancy word for a reboot. All right, we've got some kind of internal issue that's going on. It could be the fact that it's damaged, right? So that could happen too, all right? Low memory errors, all right? What happens here when we say low memory errors? Low memory errors mean you got too many things in the print queue and the printer just cannot handle the volume, right? That could happen. Now, be careful with this one because sometimes it's field serviceable, sometimes it isn't. And what I mean by that is you have some printers that have the built-in memory, especially one that is a network printer and also has a print server built into it. They have to have a certain bit of memory, volatile memory source, that they can actually store the print jobs that come over the network to it. Sometimes you can gain access to it. Sometimes you can see you can pull the side, a little cover right off the printer, kind of like a fuse box in your car. Just pull the cover right off, and sure enough, you can see SODIMM memory. Sometimes you see the full dual inline memory modules, and sometimes it's upgradable. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you don't have access to those, and other times you might be able to, under a servicing contract where you have a third party that actually comes in and performs all the maintenance to begin with. So that's something that we can't overlook. Warranties and actually third-party technicians, you know, that actually oversee printers. All right, what else do we got? Again, I know it is a bunch of different things that can go wrong with the printers, right? So the next thing they talk about is access denied. Two things that I can think of. First of all, permissions. You don't have, let's say in Windows, you don't have the print permission. Guess what? Access is denied. It's an ACL. It's an access control list. It controls access to the device. Here's the other thing. All right, I don't know about you, Dan, in some of the places that you've worked, but I know in some of the places that I worked where the teachers and the instructors were working, I was one of the instructors, we actually had a time of day restriction on it that said you're not going to print your 800-page PDF for your instructor's manual at a certain time. Right? You had to wait to off hours, right? They don't want one of their people that are actually doing consulting for a company to have to sit there and wait while your 800-page instructor manual prints. So it could be a time of day restriction where they actually have enforced that and they say, okay, between this time and this time, it's only going to be marketing and sales. It's only going to be account executives. It's only going to be our customer relations, customer relations management, right? CRM people. Right? So it could be a time of day restriction as well. All right. Now this one's generic. I like this one, Dan. Printer won't print. I think that's why
Isn't
we're
that
doing
like
this
the
episode.
whole purpose of this episode is printer won't print?
Right. So I've got a laundry list on this one too. And
Let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, wash, rinse, repeat, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's probably some poor guy in the shower that has been rinsing his hair for about 5 years.
It says repeat.
Yeah,
I'm bloody.
it didn't say stop, right?
If you've never seen it, you got to go online and look up the shampoo prank at the beach. I was rolling on the floor laughing hysterically, and because I won't spoil it for you.
Don't
But
spoil it,
definitely go
that's
check
right.
that out. Hysterical.
So let's go ahead and start the episode over. Just kidding, guys. So when printer won't print, let's just kind of brief through some. You know, power issues, permission errors, or permission configuration issues, lack of permissions, if you will. You know, paper jams. Look for the OCD, or OCD, not OCD.
Literally all the things
OCD.
we've been saying.
Right, pretty much everything that we've said, right?
I want to know who wrote this.
Out of print media,
Yeah.
no toner, no ink, missing ribbons. Here's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet. Let's go ahead and look at a little diagram I have too, because we haven't mentioned like the thermal printer, right? The thermal printer has a heating element, right? And they have what are called direct thermal printers. You probably say, I've never seen a direct thermal printer. Yes, you have anytime you've gotten a receipt from something. That is a direct thermal printer. Pay at the pump, they print a receipt out, guess what? That is a direct thermal printer because it has a series of a heating element that makes a striking contact with the paper. And since the paper itself is thermally sensitive to heat, if you will, it changes the color of the paper. Now the problem is sometimes the heating elements can either fail because they got overheat, you know, it's past its lifetime, or they can get a little bit of debris and dirty in there. And what happens they overheat the paper. I want you to think about, you know, if you're out at a campfire, right? What happens to paper when you burn it, right? You get a little bit of ash in there, right? Well, could be a little bit of residue. And you might just need to clean the heating elements, right? The striking element there too. So that's the other one that I did want to mention, because we really haven't talked too much about thermal printer. If you have a missing ribbon, if it's an impact printer, damaged print head assemblies. Here's another one too, damaged corona wires, right? The corona wires inside of the laser printer itself, if these fail, right, we don't have essentially a pulling down of the toner to the EP drum. We don't get the paper that's charged that, you know, opposites attract, that actually pull the toner off of the EP drum down to the paper itself. Could be the issue too. Damaged laser assembly inside of the printer. If the laser assembly has failed, well, guess what? You're not going to get any printed output, right? So that could cause problems. The other thing too, driver issues and missing drivers, right? We've talked about some of them in our printer technologies. If you need a PCL driver, printer control language, post printer description, PPD. If you need a universal print driver for things like your multifunctioning devices, raster bitmap, plotter vector, right? So you have to make sure that you have the appropriate print drivers too. All right. Some of the other ones that we have too, printer prints in wrong color. Could be a configuration issue, right? If you, here's something, because of the fact that color prints cost considerably more, you know, considerably more than black and white, they might actually disable color printing. So you might be expecting color printing and you get black and white, right? That's just because their company's probably trying to save money. You know, I've seen it where it's like, okay, if you're part of the marketing, yeah, you better be printing in color. We want things to look good. Anybody else? We're going to save some money. You're going to print in black and white. So it could be a configuration error. Here's the other thing. If it happens to be like one of those thermal dye transfer ribbons, you could have issues with the ribbon itself. If it happens to be something like a dye sublimation printer, could be having problems with the, you know, the whole sublime, not subliminal, but sublime, you know, where it changes from one state to the other. That's what's cool about the dye sublimation printer, right? Is it the fact that it goes from your print compound, your printing compound, I guess you'd call it the dye, goes from a solid, skips the liquid state, goes right into a gaseous state, and they mix the colors so precision that it's as good as photographic quality, right? Well, if that isn't happening, guess what? You could have color issues too. Could be empty color ink cartridges likewise. Here's the other thing that might happen too. If you fail to remove the protective covering on inkjet printer heads, you know, the color cartridges. I've seen that where people just popped them in and they're like, oh wait, there's a protected plastic on there. Let me pull them out and actually remove the plastic. All right, so some other things too, to round them off here, Dan. I know we're coming towards the end of this episode. Unable to install the printer. This could be standard user issues. The fact that you don't have administrative rights to be able to download and install the driver. All right, could be driver issues, could be compatibility issues, right? So this could be problems too. Error codes. Boy, there are a bunch of them. And rather than bore you guys with a bunch of different vendor types, I want you to know that they're unique to the vendor. So check and research the manufacturer's website to find out what the error code might be. It's no different than when we were talking in other episodes about things like your post-numeric error codes, your post-audible beeps, right? They're going to be specific to the vendor, and you want to make sure that even within the vendor between different models, there might not be a commonality or a consistency between them, so make sure that you're checking out and researching the manufacturer's website. Printing blank pages. I don't know if that falls under the same category as printer will not print. All right, but blank pages, again, no toner, no ink, no ribbon. Could be damaged thermal unit if the fact that you have one of the direct thermal printers. If the heating element isn't heating the paper, then guess what? You're just going to have a blank image. The protective strip that we've talked about on the ink cartridges that keeps them from drying out, that isn't removed, and I've seen that where people have gotten in, you know, get into a hurry, and they need to print now, and they pop in all those cartridges, and they forget to remove that plastic strip. And it could come down to the fact that it is just a damaged print head assembly outright. All right, so that could be the problem too. All right, so no image on printer display. What are they talking about here? But the little LCD screen that is on the front of the printer when you are going to look at local printing errors, right? We keep telling you, check the on-screen display, OCD. I keep saying OCD, I'll get it right. My OCD is kicking in. OSD, on-screen display. If that display isn't displaying information, it could be the backlighting source or the front side light, depending on what kind of lighting source it is. It could be the fact that you just have to replace that screen. So it could be a damaged LCD screen. Could be power issues as well. Might be the fact that you don't see anything on the screen, because guess what? The printer isn't turned on. Again, keep in mind that from the point of these exams, I want you to think of easy fixes first. And I say exams, but both 901 and 902, but 902 is going to be focused a lot more on software, but definitely the 901 exam. Keep in mind basic fixes first. So what are some of the things that we can use? A standard maintenance kit, right? Standard maintenance kit could be something like a telescopic magnet that allows you to pull debris out. Could be a toner vacuum. All right, now when we say toner vacuum, you say, well, wait a second, Wes, what do you mean toner vacuum, right? Well, I'm talking about the same kind of computer vacuum that has a filter for toner cloth, because you should not be breathing this stuff in, and you certainly should not be getting this on your hands. All right, it is a nightmare. It's very messy, and the fact of the matter is that it is such a fine particle that when it gets on your hands, it kind of smears, and the first thing you want to do is go to warm water and wash it, and guess what? It is so reactive to heat that even in the process of using warm soapy water to wash it off your hands, you will fuse it to your skins. It's not something you want to mess around with, let alone breathe it in, right? Because it's mixed with parts, and I don't know the chemical compound of it, right? It's not a chemistry class, but I know that very basically it's mixture of metal and plastic. Guess what? It gets into your lungs. What does metal do the moment it hits moisture, right? Unless it's really good steel. It starts to oxidize. You do not want this stuff in your lungs, right? It's not good. Not a good day at the office. Compressed air is another thing. Remember, with compressed air, don't shake the can, right? Short bursts, right? So you keep it from basically essentially condensing and blowing water across whatever it is that you're fixing. And then also check the print spooler. All right, what are we talking about? Print spooler. Remember, one of the things that I mentioned is that inside of the software itself, before the print job is actually sent to the print queue, whether it's a local printer or whether it's a print server or a network printer, it is spooled to the hard drive. All right, that essentially is what Microsoft, in Microsoft land, they call the printer. Again, they've got some weird terminology. To me and Dan and I, if I said the printer, I'm looking at the physical device over there. They're looking at the logic inside of it. However, stop and restart the print spooler, right? When we get into our, the operating system, I'm going to show you guys how to do that, because we talk about the services and stuff, and that's one of the classic ones that I like to show students on starting and, stopping and restarting. The other thing I want you to understand about the print spooler too, all right? Dan made a joke about backing up your print queue. That's really not a joke, right? That happens just because that if there's a power failure within your computer, you can recover the print job and continue to send it to the printer. And if it's a network printer, it happens locally, and you have a hard drive in that printer potentially. If that drive gets full, guess what? You'll lose the ability to print. So that's another thing. We don't really have that problem too much anymore, with just due to the large capacities of drives. But if you're one of these ones that likes to store things like a lot of high definition video, it could happen before you even know it. So again, remember, the Louisville Slugger is not technically part of your maintenance kit, but in the end of the day, might make you feel a little better.
An emergency break glass, right? Well, there you go. There's obviously quite a bit to printer maintenance, and that's why that's basically the bane of our IT tech experience, right? It's not a lot of fun because they'll break, and you'll have no reason why it should be broken, and you're gonna have to walk through this laundry list of things that it could possibly be until you find the right one, hopefully, right? Fingers crossed. And then, oh, well, it looks like the Louisville's coming back out, and we're gonna buy a new printer. Hey, sometimes that is a viable option. Just get a whole new device, because this thing is broke to begun repair. That does happen. Wes, we do thank you for walking us through this list and giving us the information that we'll need to pass the exam if they ask us questions about repairing printers. So definitely go over this a couple of times and bury that information deep into your brain, because you're going to need it for the exam and real life. But it does look like we are out of time for this episode. We do thank you for watching, though. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.